So why don't you use the regular army? What do you need us for?
Because some damn fool accused you of being the best.
Dillon! You son of a bitch!
Hey hunter killers, Predator fans, trophy hunters worldwide. Welcome back to Predator Minute, the podcast that breaks down the 1987 action sci-fi classic Predator 1 minute at a time. I'm John.
And I'm Aaron.
And today we'll be discussing Minute 5 of Predator. Minute 5 opens with the manliest handshake we've seen so far and ends with, well, the new manliest handshake ever.
I would argue that this one still stands.
I would argue that as well in terms of manly handshakes. But before we talk about the handshake, I think it would be good to just take this chronologically. We're finally out of the credits, which is a good and a bad. Bad in that you don't necessarily have as much of a flow to here's all the background research I'm doing, but good in that I feel it just opens up things for us a lot more. After General Phillips and Dutch in their brief greeting, after Dutch leaves the chopper, the two of them go over the mission briefing, the whole reason why the general called in Arnold and his team. And the quick and dirty details are given by General Phillips, who is explaining that 18 hours ago, they lost a chopper carrying a cabinet minister and his aide in this charming little country, this unnamed little country, but they have a fix on the transponder, and they believe that the cabinet minister and the aide are in guerrilla hands now.
This cabinet minister, does he always travel on the wrong side of the border?
I like how you're going right to Arnold's quote here, because I would say that any quote that Arnold gives in this movie is still to this day a quotable line, because he talks about right on the wrong side of the border.
Yeah.
Later on greets Carl Weathers in this minute. Yeah, so this original plan, this original mission is simply a rescue mission as it's presented to Dutch. Originally in this script, Dutch goes over this whole plan with General Phillips and General Phillips and Dillon from start to finish. But instead, in the movie, I like how this is done, where very briefly, General Phillips goes over the plan, the necessities with Arnold before Carl Weathers interrupts, and they do the manly handshake and then go over the rest of the mission. I wanted to talk a little bit about the map they use that you see just really briefly a couple of times. There's a lot of map coding, but did you want to talk about the map a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to start by mentioning that I don't think this map was meant to be examined in great detail. I think this is something that we are doing just for fun, but as far as its impact on the actual movie, it's safe to say that it has no impact. You're just supposed to know that you're looking at a map as far as it relates to the actual plot. But some sort of fun things to note about it. You sort of alluded to the fact that there's some interesting coding and things on the map that make it sort of interesting to look at. The first thing that is definitely noticeable is it's got some very obvious Brazilian place names on it. So it's clearly a map of somewhere in Brazil. And if you look in one of the frames, it gives you a name that you can pick out. It says Chapada das Mangaberas, which is a mountain range in Brazil, sort of north central Brazil. And one of the reasons why we're looking over this is to see if they give us any clues as to where this movie is supposed to take place. And I want to be clear that Chapada das Mangaberas is like this kind of savanna looking terrain based on the stuff I'm seeing on Google searches of it. It's not tropical rainforest or jungle, which is what you see in the movie. So it's clearly not in the area that's depicted on the map. Not to mention the fact that this movie is all about communist guerrillas in a Spanish-speaking country, and Brazil doesn't really have a history of either of those things. So it wouldn't make sense for it to be in Brazil, just to be clear. Some of the other interesting things on the map, you actually, I think, did a really good job of pointing some of these things out to me before and clarifying some of the thoughts on it, is the map has some things written on it. So it's got a couple things on it. When he first points at the map, you get a little bit of a bigger overview, and then they zoom in more closely a minute later on the sort of the wider shot, slightly wider shot. One of the things you can see is something that looks like some kind of flight trajectory pointing to a spot that's then designated with a big red dot where it says first contact, and then it's got a time next to it, 2322, and then next to it, it's got the word code with a 4-digit code after it, which, as you point out, is absolutely the way you would denote a transponder code, like a beacon that you would activate in the event of a crash, or would self-activate. And then at the bottom of it, it says C-130, and that, hard to say exactly what that refers to. My guess is that refers to whatever aircraft it was that picked up the signal, and so it's probably a C-130 nearby is what they're referring to. And then they have a small semicircle drawn around the dot, and presumably that's something like a possible radius that the aircraft could have gone down on, because the transponders, it's certainly in 1980s technology, would not have been able to necessarily give you a pinpointed location. Have to estimate that it's going to be within a certain distance, a certain number of miles or kilometers of a particular point. And then down in the lower left, there's some other sort of unintelligible numbers and letters that I'm not going to try to decipher. I'm going to go ahead and guess that they don't mean anything particularly important. And then they give a little bit closer shot a second later, and then it's even more obvious that you're looking at a map of Brazil. But I think the idea is that you're looking at a map, and that's supposed to tell the characters in the movie important information. So I think now would be a reasonable time to speculate on exactly where you think this movie takes place. I've got some ideas of where I think it might be. What about yourself? What are your thoughts? What have you